Welcome to the Peace Place. This is Judy. I'm the penman of Prayums, founder of the Peace Movement, and I bring you today a word of encouragement, an invitation to be able to learn more about the reality that we can interact with a loving God. We can learn to hear from God as we walk through our days. Every promise that God has given us, He is faithful to perform and deliver. He certainly has rules, ways that we need to follow, and God's ways are not our ways. God's understanding is not our understanding. So today in this word, I pray that the understanding that we all have goes to a deeper level, a way that we can understand that how much we rely on our minds and how little we hear from the heart of God, from the ways of God, and from the will of God. And it doesn't have to stay that way. So this whole body of work of the peace movement, and every day that I walk this journey, I find another deeper layer of God's presence and His willingness to lead and guide and direct us. He will heal, correct, and restore us to His original plan, and we have to learn how to do that. No more than the ways that once our mind is developed, that is the way that we live every day, just as we embrace any religious teachings that we have. They mostly are stored in our mind and the ways that things should, could, would, or ought to be. And oftentimes we find that there's very little life, there's very little love, and the direction that we are encouraged to is through the distortions of man's understanding and man's ways, rather than using the love of God as our indicator of where truth is, and discovering how we can live a life filled with God's love and live in a peace that passes all understanding, and learn to determine what is God's love, God's ways. And one of the most amazing things to me is we can submit ourselves unto God, and He will make our path straight. He will renew our minds. He will restore us. He will reveal His plan, and He will show us how to walk that out. Well, having searched for many, many decades about if there really was a truth and if there really is a love that is good, and one certainly that cares about us as individuals. After searching that and then finally discovering that it is the Word of God, it is the will of God, and it is the way of God to reveal to each of us that we belong to Him. We belong to love. We are a spark of God's love. And we can learn all about what that means. We can be assured that the ways of man are always motivated by an agenda that is to draw us away from the solidarity of God, about the ways of God, especially those ways of love. So we have much wonderful learning that there is, that once we learn it, receive a revelation from the heart of God Himself, our lives are changed forever. And each one of us, no matter what we've done, no matter where we've been, no matter what we've followed, God is big enough to draw us back into His heart, into His love, and teach us how to walk His ways. So today I bring you awakening again in you. This is a prayer. It is comes out in poetry form. But join me today as we speak to God. We petition God to be able to awaken us into His ways, in His world, according to His will. awakening again in you. Will you renew our minds, heal our hearts with your hand, embrace us and assure us we can always stand, for you promised to go before us today and be our rear guard as we learn of your way. So grateful to now know you will provide. You teach us how to listen and abide. You draw us and show us our part, each day revealing so much more of your heart. Though the world and its ways are scattered, if we focus on that mess, we feel battered. Yet, by just turning our minds to your provision, your healing balm heals wounds of division. Our mind calms, hope arises, and we see your hand and your love sets us free. So we speak to our mind and its ways, line up with God's truth all our days. Yes, we have authority and we speak, sometimes forgetting as we seek. Yet you ever-present loving power stands up and reminds us in this hour. We're so grateful. So much of the time we're not taught that God is a responsive God. All of the truth that he spoke, all of that, the creation that he spoke at the beginning still exists. God's ways still exist. God's will still exists. And God's plan still exists for each one of us. And we can learn. It's never too late to learn that God, you are a spark of God's love. You belong to God. And God will show us, each one of us, the way that he had planned for us before the beginning of the earth was laid. So God will renew our minds. We know physiologically how our brains work and how thought clusters and how memories work and how things are released. And, we have the average person has over 40,000 thoughts a day. And how many of your thoughts today are taken captive to the obedience of Christ? How many times do we even understand that that's possible? Well, it is possible. We can submit our minds unto him. We can ask God to search our hearts and create in us a clean heart and a renewed spirit. We can interact with God, and God is faithful to do what he said. We can also say much other things, and God is faithful to have to honor those things. He tells us not to be double-minded, but when we have a heart and a mind that's fixed on God, we are at perfect peace. Where there is perfect peace, there is divine health. Those are things that are not real familiar to many of us, but they can be. You can learn about how to live in that place of perfect peace where God, the creative God, then can still rearrange every cell of our bodies. He can do whatever it is that he desires to do at that time when we belong to him. We submit ourselves unto him, and we allow him to do what he would like to do through us, with us, and for us. The world's ways are very scattered. The agendas of the world are sourced in much that is out to kill, steal, and destroy. And yet at the same time, God teaches us that there's nothing greater than the power of agreement with God. When we get on the same page with God, submitted to his will, his plan will come to pass. We oftentimes are not taught how to do that, but we can be taught. We can learn to live that way. The agendas of the world are not designed to bring one mind and one accord, at least one mind or one accord that is good, one that will help us prosper, one will help us to learn about the rules that bring us abundant life. And he says, yet by turning our minds to your provision. Yes, as we learn to see not just about God, not just to rely on our past teachings, but actually put a demand on the atmosphere, the place where the Spirit of God is, there is freedom and there is liberty. Let us tap into that freedom and that liberty and tap into the one that can turn anything around on a dime. All things are possible when we believe. Let's learn not to believe our minds. Let's learn to even notice we're relying on our minds or on another man's mind and agenda, and watch what the ultimate intention for it is certainly not to bring love. Our minds calm when our minds are on God. Hope arises and we see. So we see your hand and your love sets us free. Yes, the bondage that we live in, the restrictions that we live in, the distortions that we live in have removed our freedom and our liberty, and it does not have to happen. We can align with God, God's will, God's way, and God's desire is that we live in the freedom that Christ died to give us. We need to learn what that means before we can live in it, and we can learn that. So we have the authority to speak to our minds, all of those thoughts that are running through our minds, all those suggestions that we hear from others, all of those familiar agendas of all that's not peace that's there for us to listen to. We do not have to listen to that. And we can speak to our mind and tell it to be quiet. But of course, we're not going to do that if we don't know that there is another something else to listen to in the voice of God, the heart of God, and the ways of God will always lead us to that place of perfect peace that passes all understanding. So we do have authority when we speak, and we can learn about what that means. Let's see. God's loving, ever-present power is still the creative power of the universe. That way, God's way, helps us discern the difference between man's way and God's ways. And we can learn that yet today. So God, when we call on God, he will answer us and show us great and mighty things. God teaches us what our part in that whole thing is. We can learn his ways are peace, love, joy, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness, and self-control. That's what he's trying to mold and make us into, so we can reflect his love on the earth. We can do that. We can learn how to hear from God, and we can learn how to interact with God, and we can learn how to be filled with and led by the power of his loving Spirit. So if any of this is interesting to you today, you're welcome to subscribe here on our channel. Tell other people about us. You can find us at prayoms.com. That's PRAYOEMS.com. And the peacemovements.com. There's going to be many peace movements out there, but keep looking for the one that is the peace that passes all understanding. So I come to you wishing you peace, love, and joy today. This is Judy signing off for today. Peace and blessings to you.